The sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the crowded marketplace. It was one of those lazy afternoons when people seemed to linger over everything, haggling over exotic fruits, browsing racks of eclectic trinkets, or simply basking in the warmth of the day. I was no different, ambling aimlessly, clutching a steaming cup of synth-brewed coffee that tasted like regret and desperation. I turned a corner, distracted by a vendor hawking what he claimed to be authentic Martian sand art, which, judging by the price, was probably just red beach sand from New Australia, when I felt it. A presence. Not the kind of presence where you glance up and catch someone looking at you, but the kind that grabs you by the spine and rattles you like a coin in a tin can. It was as if the world had slowed, the ambient chatter fading into a muffled hum. She stood there, motionless in the crowd, a figure who looked as though she belonged to another dimension entirely. Her skin shimmered in iridescent hues, like oil on water, and her eyes, her eyes, were molten gold, glowing faintly as if lit from within. She wore a suit that clung to her like a second skin, a patchwork of organic and metallic materials that pulsed faintly with a life of its own. And she was staring straight at me. I froze, coffee halfway to my mouth, suddenly acutely aware of how ordinary I must have looked in comparison, just some guy in a scuffed jacket and worn-out sneakers. Her gaze bore into me with an intensity that made my heart stumble. Then, to my utter disbelief, her glowing eyes brimmed with tears. She began to cry. Not the delicate Hollywood kind of crying either. This was raw, gut-wrenching sobbing. Her shoulders shook, her shimmering skin rippled, and the tears that fell weren't even water. They glowed faintly, each droplet evaporating into a puff of sparkling mist before hitting the ground. Naturally, I did what any sensible person would do in such a situation. I panicked. Are you okay?" I stammered, stepping closer, but not too close. "Did I step on your toe or insult your cosmic fashion sense by existing?" She didn't respond. Instead, she took a shuddering step toward me, her luminous tears cascading faster. "Hey, look," I said, holding up my hands. "I don't know what I did, but I'm sorry, all right? If you're looking for Earth's worst human, congratulations, you found him. I'll even sign an apology waiver if you need one." The crowd around us began to notice. People whispered, pointed, and a kid somewhere asked loudly, "Is she a hologram, Mommy?" And that's when she spoke. "You are the child from the photo," she said, her voice resonating in a way that wasn't entirely physical. It was like hearing a melody in my bones, a haunting, otherworldly harmony that made every hair on my body stand on end. "The photo?" I echoed, blinking. "Lady, I think you've got the wrong guy. I don't even take good selfies." But she shook her head, a movement so graceful it seemed choreographed. She reached out a trembling hand, almost as if to touch me, but stopped inches away, as if the act might shatter her. "It is you," she murmured, her voice cracking with emotion. "The child, 5 solar cycles old, your smile. It is you." This was officially the weirdest moment of my life, which was saying something considering I once got locked in an autonomous laundromat overnight. "Right. Okay," I said, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. "Let's back up. Who are you and why are you crying? Are you allergic to me? Because I've got antihistamines in my bag." Her knees buckled. Before I could react, she collapsed into my arms, her weight surprisingly light for someone of her height. The crowd gasped, and someone yelled, "Call a medic." "Great," I muttered under my breath. I broke the alien lady. I eased her down to the ground, her iridescent skin dimming slightly like a light bulb losing power. Up close, her features were even more surreal, delicate yet alien, with faint, bioluminescent veins that pulsed beneath the surface. Hey, stay with me," I said, patting her cheek lightly. "I don't even know your name yet." "Come on, at least give me that much before you faint dramatically in public." Her golden eyes fluttered open, and she whispered a single word, "Nira." Then she was out cold. The medics arrived within minutes, their hover stretcher hissing softly as they loaded her on. A stocky man in a navy jumpsuit shot me a questioning look. "Friend of yours?" he asked. "I wouldn't say that," I replied, scratching the back of my neck. "She just kind of showed up, cried, and passed out. You know, a normal Tuesday." He didn't look convinced, but shrugged. "We'll take her to the clinic. You might want to come along. She was mumbling your name before she blacked out." "Fantastic," I muttered, because this situation wasn't weird enough already. As I followed the stretcher through the marketplace, a strange mix of dread and curiosity churned in my chest. Who was Nira? Why did she recognize me? And what was this about a photo? Little did I know, the answers would upend everything I thought I knew about myself and my father. The clinic was an exercise in contradictions. Sleek, futuristic architecture, all seamless glass and glowing panels, but staffed by medics with the bedside manner of grumpy houseplants. Nira was placed in an examination pod that hummed softly as it scanned her, its translucent walls lighting up with incomprehensible symbols. I stood nearby, clutching a vending machine packet of something that claimed to be emergency hydration gel, but looked like an alien's leftovers. "She's stable," one of the medics finally said, a tall woman with a voice as sharp as her haircut. She didn't seem fazed by Nira's glowing, otherworldly appearance, typical for Earth's cosmopolitan mix of species these days. "Whatever she is, her physiology's bouncing back. Give it a few hours, and she'll be good as new." "Great," I said. "Any chance you can explain why she collapsed in the first place? Maybe she saw Earth coffee prices and fainted in protest." The medic didn't even crack a smile. Tough crowd. With little else to do, I settled into one of the clinic's uncomfortable chairs and waited. Nira's pod cast a soft blue glow, and her features seemed more peaceful now, as if she were caught in the middle of a pleasant dream. I couldn't stop staring at her. The way her bioluminescent veins pulsed faintly beneath her skin was mesmerizing, like a living work of art. As I sat there, my mind kept circling back to her words. "You are the child," from the photo. It made no sense. My father had died years ago, a retired engineer with a penchant for telling bad jokes and tinkering with machines he probably shouldn't have touched. He wasn't the kind of guy to leave behind cosmic mysteries, or so I thought. Hours passed, and I was halfway through a very questionable snack bar from the vending machine when Nira stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, the molten gold glow softer now, but no less captivating. She looked around, disoriented, before her gaze landed on me. "You stayed," she said, her voice still carrying that resonant, musical quality. "Yeah, well, leaving didn't feel like an option," I replied. "Besides, I couldn't let you rack up a medical bill without a familiar face around to laugh about it." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "Medical bill?" "Never mind," I said, waving it off. "Earth humor. We'll get to that later. Now, how about you explain why you recognized me like a long-lost cousin at a family reunion?" Nira sat up slowly, her movements fluid and deliberate. The light in the pod shifted to a soft green, signaling her recovery. She took a deep breath, though it looked more like she was recalibrating her entire system, and then spoke. "My name is Nira," she began, her voice steady now. "I am from the planet Zynar, in the Altiri system. Decades ago, your father came to my world." I blinked. "You're going to have to be more specific than that. My dad? Average height guy, bad jokes, always smelled faintly of motor oil? That guy?" "Yes," she said with a faint smile, as though the description amused her. "But to us, he was much more. He saved us." She began to recount her story, and the words painted images in my mind so vivid it felt like I was living them. Zynar, she explained, was a world of breathtaking beauty. Endless forests that glowed with bioluminescent light, cities built from crystalline structures that sang when the wind passed through them, and a sky that shifted colors in waves like an ocean. But beauty masked fragility. Decades ago, Zynar's energy core, the source of all life and technology on the planet, began to fail. The intricate balance that sustained their ecosystem collapsed, throwing the planet into chaos. Desperate for solutions, Zynarians reached out to neighboring systems, hoping for aid. That's when my father arrived. He came not as a savior, but as a curious soul, Nira said. He listened to our plight, studied our technology, and worked tirelessly to find a solution. He was not like the others. Others? I asked. Many offered aid only in exchange for power or resources, she explained. But your father gave freely, asking only for our trust. He spent years with us, repairing what he could, and teaching us how to sustain ourselves. His kindness was remarkable. The more she spoke, the more surreal it felt. My dad? The guy who once spent an entire afternoon trying to fix a toaster only to declare it a lost cause. Okay, let's say I believe you, I said cautiously. Where do I come into all this? Her expression softened, and she reached into a compartment on her suit, pulling out a small palm-sized device. It lit up, projecting a hologram into the air. A photo of me, 5 years old, grinning like an idiot in a superhero t-shirt, my hair sticking up at odd angles. This, she said, is the photo your father carried with him. He showed it to me, saying it reminded him of hope. I memorized it, never knowing if I would see you in person, until today. I stared at the hologram, my mind racing. It was undeniably me, captured in all my childhood awkwardness. But why would my father show this to an alien species on the verge of collapse? And why did it matter so much to Nira? Before I could voice my questions, she spoke again, her voice tinged with sadness. I came to Earth because Zynar is failing once more, she said. The solutions your father provided were temporary. Our energy core is dying, and with it our planet. I hoped you might possess his ingenuity. Me? I said, almost laughing. Lady, I can barely fix a broken lamp without making it worse. I'm not exactly hero material. Her gaze didn't waver. Perhaps not, she said, but you carry his spirit. And sometimes, that is enough. The weight of her words settled over me, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Guilt? Responsibility? Whatever it was, it mixed uneasily with the absurdity of the situation. All right, I said, trying to lighten the mood. But if I'm going to save your planet, we're going to need a lot more than hope, and probably duct tape. Lots of duct tape. Nira tilted her head, clearly not understanding the joke, but her faint smile returned. In that moment, I realized my life was about to change in ways I couldn't begin to fathom, and I had a sneaking suspicion I was going to need a much bigger toolbox. I wasn't sure what was more unsettling, the fact that an alien woman thought I was the second coming of my father's engineering genius, or the fact that she might be right. Either way, I needed answers. After convincing Nira to rest and promising I wouldn't skip town while she napped in the clinic, I went home to dig through my father's belongings. His things had been sitting in the attic for years, packed away in the kind of neat labeled boxes that suggested he'd planned for someone like me to poke through them someday. The attic was a graveyard of memories, dusty photo albums, old tools, and countless knickknacks from my dad's travels. But it was the box labeled Zynar Project that sent a shiver down my spine. The name seemed too deliberate, too specific to be a coincidence. I hauled it down to the living room, sneezing as a plume of dust erupted from the lid. Inside I found journals, faded diagrams, and a few objects that didn't look like they came from Earth. A small metallic sphere that pulsed faintly when I touched it, a shard of translucent material that refracted light into a rainbow of colors, and what appeared to be a half-finished gadget made of mismatched parts. This, I muttered, holding up the gadget, explains why he was always late to family dinners. I flipped through the journals, their pages filled with sketches of alien landscapes, detailed schematics, and notes written in my dad's familiar scrawl. One entry caught my eye. Zynar's energy core is unlike anything I've seen, organic yet mechanical, alive in a way that defies logic. If I can stabilize it, their world might stand a chance. His words were equal parts awe and determination, and for a moment, I felt like I was seeing a side of him I'd never known, a man driven by curiosity and compassion. And then I found it, a yellowing envelope tucked into the back of one of the journals. Inside was a letter addressed to me. Kai, if you're reading this, it means I'm not around to explain things myself, and for that I'm sorry. You've always been my greatest joy, and I never wanted to burden you with the weight of my choices. But Zynar, it became more than a project. It became a second home, and its people became family. I showed them your photo because I wanted them to see what I was fighting for, a future worth saving. You reminded me why hope matters, even in the darkest times. If they ever find you, it means they need help. You don't have to be me, Kai. You just have to be you. That will always be enough. Love, Dad. I stared at the letter, my chest tight. My dad had always been a man of few words, but this was something else. He'd believed in me, even though I'd never given him much reason to. Well, Dad, I said aloud, I hope being me is enough because I'm pretty sure I'm winging this. Determined to learn more, I dug deeper into the box and found a holodisc labeled Zynar Archive. My dad had left behind a portable holoprojector, so I slotted the disc in and powered it up. A three-dimensional image flickered to life, projecting a breathtaking scene of Zynar's bioluminescent forests and crystalline cities. The colors were so vivid they almost hurt to look at, and the sounds of alien wildlife filled the room. Whoa, I whispered, leaning closer. This beats every screensaver I've ever had. The projection shifted, showing Zynarians, tall, elegant beings with shimmering skin like Nira's, working alongside my dad. He looked younger, more vibrant, as he laughed with them and tinkered with some kind of glowing machinery. Then the tone shifted. The next series of images showed chaos, dark skies, fires, and a city crumbling into itself. My dad appeared again, this time looking grim as he worked frantically on a device I couldn't recognize. The final image was of him standing before a crowd of Zenarians, holding up a small glowing crystal and smiling despite the exhaustion etched into his face. That's a lot to live up to, I muttered, shutting off the projector. When I returned to the clinic, Nira was sitting upright, her glow brighter than before. She looked up as I entered, her golden eyes filled with curiosity. You found something, she said. Oh, I found a lot, I replied, dropping the holoprojector on the table between us. Turns out my dad was basically a space superhero, no pressure or anything. Nira tilted her head, clearly puzzled by the term. Never mind, I said. Point is, he left a lot of notes, and I think they might help. But before we go any further, I need to know, why me? I'm not my dad. I don't have his skills or knowledge. I can't even fix my own dishwasher without calling a technician. Nira's gaze softened. Your father's genius was not only in his skills, but in his perspective. He saw connections others overlooked, and he trusted his instincts. You carry his spirit, Kai. Perhaps that is what Zynar needs most. Great, I said with a dry laugh. So I'm supposed to save your planet with vibes and blind optimism. Got it. She smiled faintly, the gesture surprisingly warm. You underestimate yourself. Your humor, for example, it is peculiar, but it may serve you well. Peculiar? I said, pretending to be offended. I'll have you know my humor is cutting edge. Her laugh, soft and melodic, caught me off guard. For a moment, the weight of everything didn't seem so crushing. And as we talked, a plan began to take shape. Nira explained that the energy core on Zynar was failing again, and this time, the problem was even more complex. My dad's temporary fix had bought them decades, but the system was now beyond their ability to repair. The core is alive in its own way, she said. It requires someone who can think beyond conventional methods. Your father saw that. Perhaps you can too. I wasn't sure if she was delusional or just overly optimistic, but something in her faith made me want to try. All right, I said, leaning back in my chair. If we're doing this, I'm going to need coffee. Lots of coffee. And maybe a crash course in how not to die in space. Agreed, she said, her expression serious. Then, after a beat, she added, although I recommend avoiding Earth coffee. It is abysmal. I barked out a laugh, and for the first time, the enormity of the situation felt just a little more manageable. Little did I know, the real journey was only beginning. Leaving Earth isn't something you wake up and do on a whim, like deciding to clean out your garage or finally try that mystery meat in the fridge. It's an ordeal. And by ordeal, I mean it involves bureaucracy, questionable technology, and enough paperwork to make you consider going off-grid entirely. But when you throw in an alien with a glowing complexion, a failing energy core on a distant planet, and the legacy of a father who may or may not have been part Einstein and part MacGyver, the whole thing takes on a new level of absurdity. We started the morning in a local interstellar transport hub, a gleaming labyrinth of corridors, kiosks, and customs officers who clearly hated their jobs. Neera stood out like a bioluminescent beacon among the crowd, drawing stares and whispers wherever we went. Do they always look this suspicious? She asked, glancing nervously at a group of customs officials eyeing her with open curiosity. Suspicious? Nah, I said, grinning. That's just their default setting. They're trained to assume everyone's smuggling contraband or harboring secret alien parasites, which in your case might actually be true. Her lips quirked upward in what I was beginning to recognize as the Xenarian equivalent of an eye roll. You find this amusing? A little, I admitted. I mean, come on. You're literally the most interesting thing in this building. Meanwhile, I'm just some guy in a hoodie trying to figure out how to use a vending machine that speaks 6 languages. After an eternity of forms, retina scans, and one very awkward moment where a customs officer demanded to inspect the glowing sphere from my dad's collection, we were finally cleared for departure. Neera had managed to secure a small starship, borrowed, she assured me, though her reluctance to elaborate suggested borrowed might be a stretch. The ship, Starwind, was compact and sleek, its silvery hull gleaming under the artificial lights of the docking bay. Inside, it was a mix of advanced tech and barely functional systems, like someone had tried to retrofit a sports car with parts from a junkyard. This is our ride? I asked, stepping aboard and immediately tripping over a loose cable. Neera nodded, her expression calm. It may not look impressive, but it is reliable. Reliable? I said, eyeing a panel that sparked ominously. Sure, and I'm the king of Saturn. Do all humans complain this much? Only the smart ones, I shot back, though I couldn't suppress a grin. As we prepared for launch, Neera began running diagnostics on the ship's systems. I tried to help, but it quickly became clear that my role was less co-pilot and more guy who holds the flashlight while she does all the actual work. Hand me the fusion calibrator, she said, not looking up from the open console. I stared at the pile of tools, none of which looked remotely like a calibrator or anything else I recognized. Is that the thing that looks like a space whisk? Or the thing that looks like a futuristic torture device? She sighed and grabbed it herself. You are uniquely unqualified for this. Hey, I'm trying, I said, holding up my hands. Besides, this is your ship. Shouldn't it, work without a complete overhaul? It works, she said, though her tone suggested the word was doing a lot of heavy lifting. By the time we were ready to launch, I had a newfound appreciation for every spaceship captain in every movie I'd ever seen. Because if those movies were even half accurate, starships were temperamental, high-maintenance divas with a penchant for breaking down at the worst possible moments. Takeoff was surprisingly smooth, considering the state of the ship. As Earth shrank into the distance, replaced by the endless black expanse of space, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and terror. "So," I said, leaning back in my seat, "how long until we get to Zynar?" "With optimal conditions, 3 days," Nira replied, her hands deftly adjusting the controls. 3 days in this flying tin can? Great. I'm sure we won't run out of air or food or sanity. She shot me a look. "You are very good at imagining worst-case scenarios." "It's a gift," I said, grinning. "Also, can we talk about the food situation? Because unless you've got a stash of chocolate somewhere, this trip's going to be rough." Her lips quirked in that almost smile again. "Zynarian provisions are more than sufficient?" "Yeah, but do they taste good, or are we talking nutritional paste with a side of despair?" She didn't answer, which I took as confirmation that my culinary expectations should remain low. The first day passed uneventfully, though I quickly discovered that space travel was less thrilling adventure and more staring out a window at infinite blackness while trying not to think about how fragile your ship is. To pass the time, I started tinkering with my dad's half-finished gadget. Nira watched with mild interest, occasionally offering advice that was both cryptic and frustratingly helpful. "That connection is incorrect," she said at one point, her tone matter-of-fact. "Oh, really?" I said, holding up the offending wire. And here I thought I was reinventing the wheel. What does this thing even do, anyway? "It is a resonance stabilizer," she explained. "Your father was designing it to harmonize with the energy core on Zynar." "Cool," I said, though I had no idea what that meant. And by cool, I mean I'll probably accidentally blow us up before I figure it out. "Do try to avoid that," she said dryly. As we settled into the rhythm of the journey, I found myself warming to Nira's presence. Her calm, almost regal demeanor balanced out my tendency to crack jokes at inappropriate times, and she had a quiet wit that caught me off guard. At one point, I asked her if Zenarians had any concept of humor. "Of course," she said, her tone light, "though ours is different from yours." "Yeah? Tell me a Zynarian joke," I said, leaning forward eagerly. She thought for a moment, then said, "What does one star say to another when they collide?" "I don't know." "What?" "Nothing. They are consumed by the resulting supernova." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. "That's not a joke. That's just astrophysics." She tilted her head, clearly confused. "But it is humorous. The collision is both destructive and poetic." I laughed despite myself. "All right, you win. Zenarian humor is officially weirder than Earth humor." She smiled, a genuine luminous smile, and for a moment, the vast emptiness of space didn't feel quite so lonely. And by the end of the second day, we were both feeling the strain of being cooped up in a small ship, but there was also a growing sense of camaraderie. We were two wildly different individuals thrown together by circumstance, united by a shared goal. And as we hurtled through the void, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Space, it turns out, is not the smooth highway of intergalactic adventure that movies make it out to be. It's more like an endless series of detours, punctuated by the occasional existential crisis. Case in point, halfway through our second day of travel, the Starwind's navigation system decided it was a good time to have a midlife crisis. The first sign of trouble was a sharp metallic whine from the control panel. "What was that?" I asked, looking up from the gadget I'd been trying and failing to assemble. Nira's hands flew across the controls, her expression a study in composed urgency. "The navigational matrix is recalibrating." "Recalibrating? That sounds like code for we're lost." "We are not lost," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. As if on cue, the ship lurched to one side, sending me sprawling against the bulkhead. "Not lost, huh?" I said, pulling myself upright. "This feels suspiciously like lost." It turned out that recalibrating was a generous interpretation of what the Starwind was actually doing, which was essentially throwing a tantrum. The navigation system had locked us out, the autopilot was stuck in a loop, and the star maps were displaying a version of the galaxy that Nira informed me was at least 2 centuries out of date. "So what you're saying," I began, watching as she attempted to override the system, "is that we're flying blind in a ship held together by duct tape and good intentions?" "Your dramatics are unnecessary," she said, though her furrowed brow suggested she wasn't as confident as she sounded. "Unnecessary?" "Nira, I'm not being dramatic. I'm being realistic. This ship is one bad sneeze away from falling apart, and now we're—" "Enough," she said, cutting me off. "I need silence to concentrate." I mimed zipping my lips but couldn't resist muttering, "If we survive this, I'm installing a GPS, and maybe a backup GPS for the GPS." After several tense minutes, Nira managed to wrestle the ship into manual control, but our course was now hopelessly off track. The closest option for recalibrating our system was an outpost on the outskirts of a nearby star system, an outpost that, according to Nira, was known for its questionable reputation. "This just keeps getting better," I said as she adjusted our trajectory. "Tell me, is this outpost run by friendly aliens who offer cookies and free Wi-Fi, or are we talking shady deals and a 50% chance of getting mugged?" She gave me a sidelong glance. "I suggest you keep your wit to yourself while we are there." "Noted," I said. "But if they offer cookies, I'm taking one." The outpost, when we finally arrived, was about what I'd expected. A bustling, chaotic hub of mismatched ships, dubious traders, and a general air of "don't ask too many questions." The docking bay was a patchwork of metal and grime, with repair drones scuttling between ships like oversized cockroaches. As we disembarked, Nira handed me a small device, a translator, she explained, though its worn casing didn't inspire much confidence. "Try not to draw attention," she said, her tone firm. "Got it. Blend in, keep quiet, and definitely don't crack jokes about their decor," I said, earning another one of her almost smiles. Inside the outpost, the air was thick with the smell of oil and alien spices. Beings of all shapes and sizes filled the space, their voices blending into a cacophony of languages. I couldn't help but stare. There were creatures with shimmering scales, others with translucent skin that revealed their internal organs, and one particularly large alien that looked like a walking coral reef. "Eyes forward," Nira murmured, nudging me. "Right. Sorry," I said, tearing my gaze away. "It's just a lot to take in. Also, is it just me, or does that guy over there have 6 arms?" Nira didn't respond, which I took as confirmation. Our first stop was a dingy repair shop run by a grizzled alien with tusks and a perpetually annoyed expression. Nira handled the negotiations, her tone clipped and professional, while I tried not to touch anything that looked like it might explode. The shopkeeper, whose name sounded like a sneeze, eventually agreed to recalibrate our navigation system for a price. "How much?" I asked, immediately regretting it when he named a figure that sounded exorbitant, even in alien currency. "Do not worry," Nira said, her voice low. "I will handle it." I watched as she handed over a small, glowing crystal, one of the items from my father's box. My chest tightened at the sight. "Was that important?" I asked once we were outside. "It was necessary," she said simply. I wanted to press her, but the look on her face stopped me. With the recalibration underway, we had a few hours to kill. Nira suggested we stay out of sight, but curiosity got the better of me. "You've been here before, haven't you?" I asked as we wandered the outpost's maze-like corridors. "Once," she admitted. "It is not a place I enjoy revisiting." "Yeah, I can see why," I said, stepping over a suspicious puddle. "But hey, at least it's colorful." She gave me a look that said, "I am rethinking every decision that led me to this moment." We ended up in a dimly lit cantina, the kind of place where every patron looked like they had a story to tell, and a knife hidden somewhere on their person. 2 drinks, I said to the bartender, who resembled a sentient tree. And maybe some snacks if you've got anything that won't kill a human. The bartender grunted and handed over 2 glowing beverages that looked like radioactive Kool-Aid. Cheers, I said, raising my glass to Nira. She sniffed her drink, then took a cautious sip. This is unusual. Unusual good or unusual bad? Unusual tolerable. I took a sip of mine and immediately regretted it. Tolerable, huh? Tastes like someone liquefied a battery. Despite the grim surroundings, we managed to share a rare moment of levity, laughing over our mismatched reactions to the alien cuisine. By the time we returned to the ship, the navigation system was fully recalibrated, and we were ready to resume our journey. As the star wind lifted off, I couldn't help but feel a pang of relief. Next stop, Zynar, I said, leaning back in my seat. Nira glanced at me, her expression unreadable. If we make it in one piece. Now who's being dramatic? I teased, earning a faint smile. The humor didn't erase the weight of what lay ahead, but it made the journey just a little easier. For now, that was enough. The journey to Zynar was mercifully uneventful after the chaos of the outpost. The Starwind hummed along at a steady pace, its recalibrated navigation system keeping us on course. The void of space stretched endlessly around us, speckled with the occasional distant star or drifting debris. While Nira remained focused on monitoring the ship's systems, I found myself staring out the viewport, my thoughts drifting as freely as the cosmic dust outside. "You're quiet," she observed, breaking the silence. "Just thinking," I said, my voice softer than usual. "About your father?" I nodded. "About all of this, really. It's a lot to take in, you know. A week ago, my biggest worry was figuring out what to do with my life. Now I'm hurtling through space with an alien who might be the only one keeping her planet from falling apart." She tilted her head slightly, her luminous eyes studying me. "And how does it feel?" I hesitated. "Like I'm caught between a dream and a really elaborate prank." Despite the relative calm, the sense of impending change hung heavy in the air. Nira had begun sharing more details about Zynar, painting a picture of a world both beautiful and fragile. "Our skies used to shimmer with colors unlike anything you've seen," she said one evening, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "They called it the fractured sky, a phenomenon created by the unique composition of our atmosphere. But now the fractures have become real. The energy that sustains our planet is failing, and with it, everything else." I leaned forward, fascinated despite the weight of her words. "And you think my dad's invention can fix it?" She hesitated, then said, "It is our best hope." "Your father understood things about our energy core that even our greatest scientists could not." I felt a pang of guilt. My dad had always been brilliant, but he'd kept so much of his work hidden. How could he have known the weight of what he left behind? Midway through our final day of travel, the ship's scanners picked up a disturbance ahead. "Unidentified anomaly," Nira said, frowning at the display. "Anomaly? That's a fancy way of saying trouble, isn't it?" She ignored my comment, her fingers flying over the controls. The screen filled with a swirling mass of energy, shimmering blues and purples that pulsed like a living thing. "Is that normal?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It is a temporal rift," she said, her voice tight. "Rare, but not unheard of in this region." "Rare and dangerous?" "Potentially." "Great. Add that to the list of things I never wanted to encounter in space." Navigating the rift was like trying to steer a canoe through a whirlpool. The Starwind groaned under the strain, its systems flickering as we were pulled closer to the swirling mass. "Hold on," Nira said, gripping the controls. "To what?" I asked, bracing myself against the nearest console. "There are literally no seatbelts on this ship. I feel like that's a serious design flaw." She didn't reply, her focus entirely on guiding the ship. The turbulence grew worse, tossing us around like a toy in a bathtub. "You know," I said, trying to lighten the mood, "if we survive this, I'm putting in a complaint with Intergalactic OSHA." Nira actually laughed, a brief, unexpected sound that cut through the tension. "I will sign the complaint myself." After what felt like an eternity, the ship broke free of the rift's pull, the swirling energy fading into the distance. "We made it," I said, slumping back in my seat. "Barely." Nira nodded, though her expression remained tense. "The rift may have delayed us. I must check our trajectory." As she worked, I let out a long breath, my heart still racing. Despite the danger, there was something exhilarating about surviving the impossible. "Remind me to add temporal rift to my list of things to brag about," I said, grinning, right after "survived a Xenarian cantina." As we approached Xenar, the ship's viewport filled with the sight of the planet. It was breathtaking, its surface a patchwork of vibrant greens and blues, with faint golden streaks tracing the edges of its continents. But even from a distance, I could see the fractures Nira had described, jagged lines of light cutting across the atmosphere, like cracks in a glass dome. Nira's expression softened as she gazed at her homeworld. "Xenar," she murmured, her voice filled with a mix of awe and sorrow. "It's beautiful," I said, meaning it. "And fragile," she added. As we entered the planet's orbit, the ship's comm system crackled to life. A Xenarian voice, sharp and urgent, filled the cabin. "They're not exactly rolling out the welcome mat," I said, catching only fragments of the language. "They are verifying our identity," Nira said, her tone calm. After a tense exchange, the comms went silent, and a small beacon lit up on the navigation display. "They've granted us clearance," Nira said, relief evident in her voice. "Great," I said, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. "Let's hope they don't change their minds when they see me." The descent to the planet's surface was smooth, the star wind guided by an automated system toward a landing platform. As we touched down, I caught sight of a group of Xenarians waiting nearby, their luminous forms glowing softly in the twilight. Nira turned to me, her expression serious. "Stay close, and remember, they will judge you not only by your actions, but also by your father's legacy." "No pressure, right?" I said, forcing a grin. She didn't smile, but her gaze softened. "You are more capable than you realize." I swallowed hard, her words both comforting and terrifying. As we stepped off the ship, the Xenarians approached, their movements fluid and graceful. Their leader, a tall figure with an aura of authority, addressed Nira in their melodic language. Though I couldn't understand the words, their tone was clear: curiosity, caution, and a hint of hope. "This is the human," Nira said, gesturing toward me. "The son of the one who saved us." All eyes turned to me, their luminous gazes both alien and familiar. Hi," I said, giving an awkward wave. "Nice to meet you?" The leader tilted their head, their expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, they smiled, a small, tentative gesture that eased some of my nerves. As we were led into the heart of their city, I couldn't help but marvel at the beauty around me. Towers of crystal and light rose into the sky, their surfaces reflecting the fractured hues of the atmosphere. For all its fragility, Xenar was a world of wonder. And as we walked, I felt a strange sense of purpose settling over me. My father had been here once, a lifetime ago. Now it was my turn to step into his legacy, and maybe, just maybe, make it my own. The heart of Xenar was a breathtaking blend of the organic and the technological. Towers of crystalline light pulsed with energy, their shapes shifting subtly as if alive. The streets beneath were lined with a mosaic of bioluminescent flora that seemed to breathe in harmony with the city. Despite its beauty, There was an undeniable fragility to it all, like a song just barely holding its tune. Nira led me through the central plaza, her posture confident yet tense. The air buzzed with faint currents of energy, and I felt like I was walking through the veins of a living creature. "What's the plan?" I whispered as we approached a large structure that resembled a flower frozen mid-bloom. "We present your father's work to the core council," she said, her tone steady. "They will assess its potential." "Sounds simple enough," I muttered. "So how many ways can this go wrong?" She didn't answer, which I chose to interpret as more than I'd like to admit. And the council chamber was a circular hall, its walls shimmering with cascading light. A group of Xynarians stood at the center, their forms more radiant than the others we'd encountered. They exuded an air of quiet authority, their movements synchronized as if they were parts of a greater whole. Nira stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Esteemed council, I bring the human descendant of the one who once saved our world." Their luminous gazes turned to me, and I felt an odd mix of awe and self-consciousness. I cleared my throat. Hi, I'm Alex. My dad, well, he was a lot smarter than me, but I'm here to help however I can." Smooth. Real smooth. To my relief, Nira took over, explaining the contents of the device we'd brought and how it could stabilize the planet's failing energy core. She spoke with a conviction that made me feel proud and a little guilty, knowing how much she was banking on something I barely understood. One of the council members stepped forward, their voice melodic yet firm. "The human legacy is not without merit, but action must follow intention." "Right," I said, nodding like I had any idea what that meant. They gestured for us to follow, leading us through a series of corridors that descended deep into the earth. The walls glowed faintly, their light pulsing in time with a distant hum that seemed to come from the planet itself. At the heart of Xynar lay the energy core, a vast, swirling nexus of light and color suspended in an enormous chamber. It was mesmerizing and terrifying all at once, its fractured state evident in the jagged flickering currents that coursed through it. "This is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nira nodded. "The core is the lifeblood of Xynar. Without it, the planet cannot survive. And we're supposed to fix that with—" I held up the device, a small, unimpressive-looking cube. "This?" She gave me a look that was equal parts encouragement and exasperation. "Trust in your father's work." "No pressure or anything," I muttered. The process of integrating the device was less than straightforward. Nira and the Xynarian engineers worked in perfect synchrony, their movements precise and deliberate. Meanwhile, I hovered on the sidelines, trying to make myself useful but mostly staying out of the way. At one point, a particularly complicated maneuver prompted me to ask, "Do you need me to hold something? Or like, hand you a wrench? Do you even have wrenches?" "Silence would be most helpful," one of the engineers said without looking up. "Got it. Silent as a vacuum," I said, earning a faint smirk from Nira. As the device was finally connected, the core pulsed violently, its fractured light surging in all directions. For a moment, the chamber was bathed in blinding brilliance, and I thought, this is it. We broke it. We broke the planet. But then slowly, the light stabilized. The fractures began to knit themselves together, their jagged edges softening into smooth, seamless currents. The hum grew steadier, resonating with a deep, comforting rhythm. Nira let out a breath I hadn't realized she'd been holding. "It's working." The engineers exchanged glances of cautious relief. "See?" I said, grinning. "Piece of cake. Barely broke a sweat." Nira shook her head, though her eyes sparkled with something close to amusement. In the days that followed, Xynar began to heal. The skies, once fractured and dim, shimmered with renewed brilliance. The city's towers grew brighter, their light reflecting the planet's restored energy. The Zenarians welcomed me as an honorary guest, their gratitude overwhelming. I even got to try more of their cuisine, though I steered clear of anything that looked like it might still be alive. "You have done more than you realize," Nira said one evening, as we stood on a balcony overlooking the city. "Pretty sure you did most of the heavy lifting," I said. She shook her head. "Your presence gave them hope, and hope is as vital as energy." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded, watching the fractured sky fade into memory. When it was finally time to leave, the goodbye was bittersweet. "You'll visit, right?" I asked as we stood by the Starwind. She raised an eyebrow. "Zynar is not exactly around the corner." "Hey, if my dad could do it, so can I said, grinning. "I'll even bring snacks next time. Something better than glowing battery juice." She smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "I will hold you to that." As the Starwind lifted off, I felt a strange mix of relief and longing. The journey had been terrifying, exhilarating, and completely life-changing. I'd come to Zynar as a confused, aimless young man, and I was leaving with a sense of purpose I'd never thought possible. My father's legacy had brought me here, but it was my own choices that had made the difference. And as I gazed out at the stars, I couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. The universe was vast, filled with infinite possibilities, and for the first time, I was ready to embrace them.